15-mile-an-hour wind. I didn't walk far away from the building. Somebody did. It was like it was kind of scary.
Yeah.
But hopefully they'll show you. They have this little movie they made years ago called Breakfast of Champions. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Where they're trying to pour the cereal and even they're pouring the milk and the milk goes flying. Anyway, they don't yell at them and tell them they should have. Anyway, I'm Emily Wrubel. I live in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. I'm a retired teacher of more years than I care to, about 40 years. We met teaching outdoor education, actually in Connecticut, and then we lived together in Munsonville for a while. We've known each other for, what did we decide, 46 years, 45 years, 40 years?
1978 or 79.
So, a long time, anyway. So I did outdoor education, then I taught several different places. Most recently, the last 14 years of it was in Peterborough. But I've retired almost 8 years ago. So.
And I'm Judy, and I live in Dummerston, Vermont, which is just right near Brattleboro. On the highest point in Dummerston. That's my dubious identification of where I live. And I mostly taught elementary school. My favorite job was I taught at the Nelson School in New Hampshire, which was a two-room schoolhouse when I was there, which was lovely.
Oh, we just had a program on that,
Oh, yeah?
on the schoolhouses.
That's right. And I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for about 6 or 7 years there and taught Keene. And then met my husband and moved to New York, worked with teachers doing curriculum work, and then my last job was as a farm educator at a nonprofit farm and sustainable education center in north of New York City, and then retired and moved to Vermont. So I've been retired for 12 years.
So you should back up if you want to be
I'll
up.
back up.
And then maybe, does she need to talk louder if she's not wearing this?
No, that's fine.
She's
You
good?
can hear.
Okay,
Great. Okay.
cool.
So we're going to share with you a very exciting adventure that we took to a year ago in February of 2024. But to prepare you for that trip, which you're going to go on with us, we want to talk a little bit about the life cycles of monarch butterflies. And so my whole love affair with monarchs began in 2018. I live, as I mentioned, at the top of a hill in Dummerston. And I had planted a flower garden, vegetable garden. Many of the flowers that I planted were pollinator friendly, but I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. One of the plants that I bought from Helen O'Donnell, who is a wonderful grower at Bunker Farm near me, is this plant called swamp milkweed. So also I just subsequently found out that they also call it butterfly weed. I noticed it at my local gardening center just a couple of weeks ago. And it is a native plant of New England. It is great to grow in gardens. It is not, it's a misnomer. It can grow anywhere. It doesn't need wet. And it grows at its height. It grows to about maybe 3.5, 4 feet high. It has these absolutely beautiful pink flowers that smell like vanilla, very fragrant. So that year when I bought this plant from Helen, I plopped it in the ground, and in probably late July, early August, I noticed that there were caterpillars all over this plant, monarch caterpillars. And they absolutely devoured the plant. They ate everything, the leaves, the flowers, everything except for the stems. That was all that was left. And I thought, based on this success story, I've got to do something more with this. So the following year, I was on the Dummerston Conservation Commission, and I thought, I'd like to really do some kind of a project with the people in my community, just to encourage them to have a garden that is friendly to pollinators, because we were all understanding that that's something that everybody needs to do to keep these insects alive. So I asked Helen to grow some swamp milkweed for me, a lot of them, and contacted people in the community through the Conservation Commission and said, let's do this project together. And to get ready for this project, I contacted this organization called Monarch Joint Venture, which is based out of Minneapolis. And they are an umbrella organization that helps people all over the United States, organizations all over the United States, community groups, Fish and Game, all sorts of organizations to figure out how to conserve pollinated insects and pollinators. primarily monarchs. And I took a couple of workshops with them. I got trained to monitor the larvae, the caterpillars. And then I thought, well, I'm going to involve people in my community to do this as well. So we got the plants ordered, all ready to go. This was 2020. Remember what happened in 2020? So all of a sudden, my project that I had planned to do took a little bit of a modification. I had planned to have people come to my house. We were going to learn how to monitor the larvae together. But then it turned out to be, we all gathered at Bunker Farm. We were all masked. I handed out the plants. They took the plants home, and I did this whole thing basically. We all did it from the comfort of our own homes and monitored information, shared videos, and that's what ended up happening for that year of 2020. So what was really great about that, I mean, even though it was an awful period in everyone's lives, is that I had nothing else to do. I was home, and I was in my garden, and I just spent as much time as I could watching these critters. I had my iPhone, that was my camera. I had my magnifying glass, and I watched this whole life cycle unfurl in front of my eyes. I was able to take videos. I could sit and watch metamorphosis happen right before my very eyes. I could sit for 4 hours with my cup of coffee watching something. And so that was pretty exciting. And what was really good for me is it gave me a sense of purpose in a world that was pretty crazy at that point. So in 2021, I wrote a grant to expand the project so that I could make this something that I could put some more information on the Conservation Commission's website and do some videos. And I learned a lot, and I was able to share this information. And so that's what I'm going to share with some of you, capsulize some of the information that I learned and shared with people in my community. So probably a lot of you know that monarchs undergo a complete metamorphosis, which means that they have very distinct life stages, and they have 4 distinct life stages. So they start as an egg, which is, as you can see up in the upper left corner, and obviously this is quite magnified. The eggs are tiny. They're very hard to find. Often they're on the underside of leaves, but I found them in other places as well. And then the eggs hatch, and from the egg, they hatch into a larva, which are the caterpillars. And there are different stages of caterpillars, which you'll get to see in a couple of slides. Then they pupate and form a pupa or a chrysalis. And then the chrysalis, from the chrysalis emerges an adult. And then the whole cycle starts all over again. It takes about 30 to 40 days, totally dependent upon temperature and weather. And so that there are multiple life cycles for the insects that are the caterpillars and the butterflies that are traveling from Mexico on their northern route. So 30 to 40 days. But the butterflies that emerge at the end of the summer here in New England and in Canada are the ones that travel all the way to Mexico, spend winter in Mexico, and then start the journey back. So they live for about 9 months, which is totally mind-boggling.
Let's see, we're ready to go on here.
So, eggs. So, I did say to you that the eggs are usually on the undersides of leaves. But the eggs that I found at this particular time were actually on the buds of the flowers of the swamp milkweed. The female butterflies only lay their eggs on milkweed. There are a variety, like 100 and something varieties of milkweed. There's some wild common milkweed, which is the ones that we see out in pastures and on the roadside, swamp milkweed and other ones as well. The females will look for healthy plants. They only lay their eggs on healthy plants. I don't know how they figure that out, but they do, which makes sense. It's survival of the species to be able to do that. Females will lay 1 egg at a time. She doesn't lay a whole cluster of eggs. And when she lays the egg, she has some kind of a glue that she secretes with the egg so that it adheres to whatever surface it's being laid on. But even though she lays 1 egg at a time, throughout her adult life, we're talking about days, she could lay up to 500 eggs. So in my garden that year, I didn't see many adult butterflies. I saw scores of eggs. And they might have just been laid by a handful of butterflies, maybe even just one or two. Pretty amazing. And the eggs, they get laid, and about 4 days after they get laid, they hatch. And then what's next are the phases of the caterpillars, and there are instars, and they're called instars. It's basically a stage of the caterpillar. And you can see that there are 5 different distinct stages, and each stage has very different characteristics. The first instar, which is over here, it starts to chew on the underside of the leaf, and it chews like this little half moon. And this is all they're eating. Because all the caterpillars are eating are milkweed leaves. And then as it's ready to move on to the next instar, it actually eats its exoskeleton, sheds its exoskeleton and eats it, and gives it a little bit of extra calories and protein. So all of these the instars, they take from, so I want to make sure I'm giving you the right information. It takes about 10 to 14 days to go from this to the fully developed caterpillar, which is going to be ready to metamorphosize. They also, one of the things about milkweed that's interesting is there are actually many things about milkweed that's interesting. First of all, it exudes this kind of latex that sometimes a caterpillar might get stuck in it and it might die from that. It also has a toxin that it exudes. So by eating the milkweed, the caterpillars become poisonous to other insects and birds and other animals that might want to eat it. There are some animals that might eat them, but very, very few. And their protective their coloration gives a signal to birds like, oh, I'm not going to eat that guy. And there's actually another, is it the viceroy? I think the
Viceroy looks like
which mimics the monarch, and they have the same coloration, but they're not poisonous because they don't eat milkweed. And so they've somehow, over evolution, that's gotten figured out. But there's so many interesting things about caterpillars. One of the things that just blows my mind is that from the beginning of the first instar to the last instar, they increase their body weight 2,000 times. So think about if you're an 8-pound baby. That means that baby would be 16,000 pounds. So really, really remarkable. So what happens is at the end of those days, the caterpillar is going to move off. Usually, it's going to move off the milkweed. This one didn't, but it will find some place to make this J formation and then start to turn into a chrysalis. And this is real time, so you take a look and see what's happening here. It looks like its exoskeleton is unzipping, and you see what's happening over here is that the chrysalis is starting to form. So this was one of the periods of time where I was just sitting there watching this thing happen. I mean, I was watching the caterpillar hanging for probably a day or two before this started to happen. And I found this happening all around my house, from leaves, on the side of the house, on rocking chairs, on a bucket, on the hose. I mean, just, they were everywhere that year.
Meanwhile, I'm at home, and she's sending me texts and videos. But she goes, it's happening. It's unzipping.
I don't have a date on this. Do I have one?
I can't see it on here. I'm sure I do at home, but
Probably the end. This was probably the end of August.
probably it was sometime, yeah, mid to late August.
Mid to late August.
In 2020.
2020.
Yeah, I think this one was either 20, I mean, I did some, I also videoed some in 2021, but something 2018, 2019, 2020 seemed like really good years for monarchs, at least around our neck of the woods. This was probably 2021. I think this was 2021. And you could see there's this interesting striation. And just notice the colors here, because it's going to look very different in different stages of the pupa. And the antennae are just kind of breaking off. The legs are breaking off. And does anyone know what's happening inside once this gets formed? Anyone want to take a guess? I'm sorry?
It's turning into mush.
Yeah.
Absolutely mush. Just a mess of cells. Anything, any characteristic that was part of the caterpillar is gone. There's just just a mess of cells that are in there, and then they reorganize themselves as adult butterflies. But they have all of the protective stuff that the caterpillars have. They're still, toxic to the things that eat them. It's just really remarkable how this happens. And towards the end, so this.
Whoops. Oh, come on, no. It'll be back in a second.
Okay. So, what happens at the end, and I didn't capture it when I was retaking it, but what happens is as it's a chrysalis, it starts gyrating. It just kind of moves all over the place, and it's sort of putting the final touches on the chrysalis. So 9. I think we're at 9.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So.
No,
what
wait a minute, just a minute, I gotta
happens
play
at,
from.
So once you saw that whole thing happening, and then nothing.
No, there it is.
And then what will happen? What it looks like for most of its period as a chrysalis is it looks like this. It just looks like a little jewel box. They're absolutely stunning. Got this little row of gold, it's like a gold necklace, and then some dots at the bottom. It's pretty much opaque during this period. You can't see what's going on inside. But as it gets close to the end of its time as a chrysalis, sometimes about 2 weeks, also totally weather dependent, if it's warm, if it's in a protected place like this one was, and it might go a little bit more quickly, you start to see that the outer casing becomes more translucent and then transparent, and you can see the scales developing. And the scales are the color of the wings. It protects the butterfly, it helps them with locomotion when they're flying. And then magic happens. This isn't enough magic. Here's the next part. Coming out. I've been sitting here for 4 hours waiting for this very moment. Chrysalis shell is totally transparent. It's popping its way out. Here's its humongous abdomen. And there it is. Hurrah! Hooray! It's going to hang out here for a while. So this usually happens in the morning, and they take advantage of sunny mornings. So again, I was sitting there for 4 hours waiting for this to happen, starting really early in the morning. And so it's emerged from the chrysalis. The chrysalis is still, you could see, it's basically clear, but you can see that little jewel line right at the top. And it's going to hang there for about 3 or 4 hours, depending upon how warm it is, just to dry out a little bit. It's starting to pump some life fluid into its wings, so the wings dry out and they get larger. Then the abdomen doesn't look as big as the wings, expand a little bit. And then when it's ready to go. There it goes. It's coming up. And here's another one. This one is just about ready to take off. This was on the side of the house. I think this one was the one that I actually found. This might have been a few years earlier that I found that one. Okay. So it's really, I found that it was really important for me to have flowering plants that were nectar laden throughout the growing season. So these are garlic chives that I have growing, and these were migrating monarchs that were heading south, stopping by at my garden to feed in to get some good sugar and nectar. And so in my garden, I not only have some flowering herbs, but there's also a lot of goldenrod that's growing on the field right near my house, and some asters. And monarchs they need a huge amount of nectarine plants to be able to survive on their way down and also on their way up. The adults need that. They also, if you think about, one of the things that I found out about that they blew me away is that they have fat that they store in their abdomen to survive through migration and the winter months. And you think about these insects that weigh nothing, and they're storing fat. And the fat, they get the fat from food that was eaten as larvae, so the leaves from the milkweed and also the sugar and the nectar that they consume. And they actually went on their journey south, and Emily will talk a lot about that. They stopped to feed a lot, and they actually sometimes gain weight on their way south. So as you can see, this is really, I was captivated by all this. And in 2024, I guess 2023, I got information about this trip from Monarch Joint Venture. They were partnering with another organization, and they were inviting people that had been involved in projects throughout the country to join them to go see the winter habitat of the monarchs. And so my husband wasn't interested in going, and I know Emily's game for anything, I gave her a call, and she's going to take it from there.
So there I was, coming out of the woods, having just checked out an osprey nest near me, and I get this call from Judy. Yeah, I want to go to Mexico. My husband doesn't want to go. What do you think? I said, well, I should probably ask my husband. And I went home, and he said, I think he just wants to get rid of me. I don't know. He always says things like, well, one of us should go. It might as well be you. That's, so I'm glad for that. That's good. So anyway, so we decided to go. I've been involved in this organization, the Harris Center for Conservation Education, which is in Hancock, which is about 40 minutes from me. And I've done a number of different things with them. It's a wonderful organization, and that's sort of how I've been involved with any kind of butterfly stuff. I'm going to go to the next. So I've been involved with, they do monarch monitoring, and so there's a field of milkweed that's in Peterborough, and we've done it with kids have come out, and then also with adults. And you're looking under the leaves trying to find these eggs that I can't see. Kids can find them, but my eyes don't do that. And then counting instars and also seeing how many adults there are, and then that information all gets sent into an organization that organizes all of it. I also went to a workshop at the Harris Center about tagging monarchs, which I think is just kind of the funniest thing that you can actually stick a tag on them. And so the tags have numbers on them. Somebody with a really fine, spotting scope might be able to read them, but really they get found when they die. And not very many, a very low percentage of them get found, but the guides in Mexico get paid for them, something like $7.50, I think is kind of what I've gleaned. I think 100 pesos, I think is what it is per one. But when the butterflies after they've mated, the males will die. And then some of them will just die in the winter anyway, and then on the way up, if people find them, and the guides collect them throughout the season and then turn them in and get some money, or anybody along the route that finds them. They don't get tagged until I'll talk about the migration in a minute, but they don't get tagged till that final, the final generation that's going to fly all the way, because they don't really want to know, these guys are just living in New Hampshire. They want to know where did they come from and how did they get to their final destination. So the organization we went with, Natural Habitat's the organization that organizes the trips, but this particular one was really special because it was also organized by Monarch Joint Ventures, which Judy had been really involved with. And the cool thing about it is that all the people on the trip were somehow actually involved in monarchs in different places. From people in Virginia, there were people in Illinois, and there were people who work with the ones in California. And it was a really special, it turned out that 12 of the 13 participants were women. That just was happenstance, but was kind of fun. Except the only one that was a man was the father of the woman from Monarch Joint Ventures, who was on the trip, and then our two wonderful male guides, who were absolutely fabulous. So why Mexico? So what happens is that the last generation that we have, the final ones that are basically the end of August, beginning of September, become adults. They're a little bit bigger than the previous ones, and they've stored up all this food as fat. If you see a chubby monarch, you know it's flying south. To me, I just think it's hilarious. But anyway, they start up here and they fly all the way down here to Mexico, to the Transvolcanic range. And we'll talk about why, because the habitat there. And they come from the Midwest, they come from New England. I guess there are some that go to Florida. I don't really know anything about them, but I've never really spent any time in Florida. So, and some of them even come from southern Canada, all the way down there. They've been doing this for, can tell they've been doing it for at least 30,000 years. And there are some western ones over here that are west of the Rockies, and they go to various different places along the coast. There are far fewer there, and this is so few that when they're actually figuring out how many butterflies they are, they're actually counting individual butterflies. Whereas in Mexico, they're counting how many acres of butterflies there are and trying to determine it. So they go down there and they get there around the end of October, beginning of November. So October 31st, November 1st, we're talking the Day of the Dead. And the Aztecs believed that the souls of the ancestors were in the butterflies. And so that's what people take food and stuff to the cemeteries, and it's a way to connect with your ancestors. They arrive there, like I say, at the beginning of November, end of October, and most of them end up high in the mountains, and there are some specific places that they go. There are some, we saw some in Mexico City, that were just like, oh, this is fine, we'll hang out here for the winter. But they live all winter, and then they stay there until March. And in March, they then start to leave, and so then they head up, and either are going to stop in northern Mexico, or they might be in Texas or one of the kind of Gulf states there, and they lay eggs there. The males, some of them will mate in the mountains, and some of them will travel with the females and mate further on. The females during the winter time are, well, probably male and female, are in this it's diapause. I always want to say diaphase, and that's not it. Diapause, like reproductive diapause. So basically, they're sort of suspended animation reproductive-wise, and so they don't reproduce until the spring. The male's job is done once they have mated with the females, and some will, like I say, die. They won't even leave. Some might go some ways. They lay the eggs, then all of them die, and those eggs, they go through the whole, caterpillar and stars, chrysalis, then adult, and that batch of adults flies further. And so we're getting like about the third generation, and fourth, depending on the weather and depending on, but when we first get them, I don't know, we start to see them end of July maybe, beginning of August, depending on the weather, depending on how long it takes them to get there, or how long each reproductive phase, each of the phases lasts, all kind of weather dependent. We see, you'll see just like a few, and then a while later you might see a whole bunch. Well, there's those, there are each of those females laying their 500 eggs, and some of those are going to make it. So when those hatch, we go, oh look, they're finally here. They might have been here a while before that. So they'll lay, we might have another generation that's here, but then that final one, end of August, beginning of September, those are the super migrators, and those are the ones that are going to leave. And if you see some caterpillars and they're like in September, they're not going to make it. They're not going to manage to make it. So here's where they go. It's the Transvolcanic range in Mexico, high mountains. When we flew into Mexico City, there were all these dark spaces. It was night, and there was lights and lights and lights, and then these dark spaces. And I, for some reason, was thinking, oh, is that water? No, it was mountains. I had never been there before. But really tall, craggy kinds of mountains, and it's a perfect habitat for the monarchs. I want to make sure I haven't skipped anything here. I think I did that. Okay. So what did we do? So we flew into Mexico City, and then we took these nice buses up over here, about a 4.5-hour drive to here, the town of Angangueo. It's a small town. It was originally like a silver mining town. Silver went bust, farming community, log cutting, all that kinds of stuff. And that's really sort of where everybody heads out to see the butterflies from. And I'll talk about that town in a second. But I want to show you the two places that we went to see the butterflies was El Rosario and Chinqua, which were two different parts of, there's a whole area that's sort of protected by the Mexican government for the monarchs, and those were two of the locations. Go ahead. So this is in the village of Angangueo. This is our motel that we stayed in. It was great. Food was fantastic, and it was cold. They had these heating things. It's like alcohol at the end of your room, and they'd come and they'd light the alcohol, and it would like give off heat for 20 minutes or something. And oh yeah, hot water bottles for your bed. You know, it was lovely. And one of the things was, bring your long underwear because they're the places to stay are not heated. There was this wonderful walkway in town, and had murals on both sides of it. And one side had like the history, from pre-Spanish coming, and then the Spanish coming, and then the silver mine, and then a big, huge mining accident, and all this kind of stuff, all painted on the walls. And then the other side was all dedicated to the monarch butterflies. In 1976, this is a National Geographic cover from 1976. Up until then, scientists did not know where the monarch butterflies went. They knew they went to Mexico because they could see them flying, but they didn't know what happened once they got there. And they were asking the people about the monarcha, and people going, oh, no, we don't know anything about any monarcha. Well, the local name for them is the palomas, which actually, if you look it up, means like dove. But that was what that's what the local people called it. So when somebody finally realized that's what they called it, they asked them, they go, oh yeah, they go up in these mountains right up here. And so that was written about in this National Geographic. So that's part of this big mural. There also, was it 2024, the one that Christine was in there? So there's another one that they were using, were they flying? Drones, I guess?
Yeah, drones.
They were using drones and so there was a whole another one that came out, like I think in 2024, National Geographic. And Christine, who was the person from Monarch Joint Ventures, who was on our group, she kept saying, well, I'm on the centerfold, like right in the middle of it. Her picture happened to be in the center of this thing, but that was the second article about the butterflies down there. The other thing I thought was really cool, in addition to the fact that this was just dedicated to them, was their life cycle is on this mural, as well as there are some predators that are of the monarch butterfly that are there, that are in this. There's mice that do, and then this is the black-headed grosbeak. I always want to say something different anyway. And then they show the migration, and this is all right in the center of this town. So one of the things that happened was when they set up this area for protecting the monarchs, they had to get the local people to buy into it. And there's really wasn't, the economy had been mining, which had gone bust. And so they made some missteps at the beginning, just saying, nope, you can't cut these trees. And local people in villages said, yeah, right, and went out and cut trees overnight. So the World Wildlife Fund got involved, and they connected with the people and made the people in the area actually own the areas where they are the reserve for the monarchs, and they are all employed there. They grow, there's mushroom farms, there's seedlings to grow new trees, there's people who act as guides, even though we don't speak any Spanish. Going with us, there was always guides that were local, that were getting paid. They sell, handicrafts and different things like that, but they really, needed to get the community's buy-in, and people are very, very proud of it. And it's also, that is their economy, is the butterflies. So this is a large area. It's about 139,000 acres, or 216 square miles. More than half the eastern monarchs butterflies winter in this area. There are other mountain peaks that they are on, or mountainsides in that same area where they are, but this is the reserve. So to get there, and I have a video here, I'll talk through the very beginning of it, and then we'll just be quiet, because when we went up there, that was one of the things, you had to be really, really quiet, and then you can see kind of what it was like. So we started out in these open air trucks, and all nicely designed. Go up to about a 45-minute ride in the trucks, and then we got, this is one of our guides there, Paolo, and then we got on horses, which was exciting. I hadn't been on one in a really long time. Judy had never been on one. These are all local men who are leading these. Everybody had somebody leading the horse, or mostly walking behind the horse because it's a narrow trail. That was one of my guides. At this point, we had a pretty easy way to get on the horses. At one other spot, it was not so easy to get off of them. Here we rode the horses up. We did not ride them back down because it was too steep for the horses to, so we hiked back down. And it's Judy happily on her horse. Very dusty. They gave us, like mask things to protect us from the dust. Um, and you can see it's kind of got a gully, so the horses would sometimes have to kind of go like this, which was, and we got up to the height of 11,109 feet. So these are the butterflies. Oh,
I'm sorry.
you've got to back
Did
up
the
and,
wrong thing.
oh yeah. You figured it out?
Yeah, okay, I know how to do this.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's all, that's fine. Well, yeah, that's good. Yeah, we'll see the first couple seconds again. When we came back down, we didn't bring the horses back down. In the second place when we were in Chinqua, we did ride the horses up and down because it wasn't as steep. Here, probably we would have just fallen off if we tried to ride back down on them.
During the winter, do they just like hibernate or do they fly? Do they just
Well, you'll see they move around. Depending on the temperature. They don't. It's a good place for them to go because the temperature does not get below freezing. But sometimes they move around to warm up, and sometimes they move around to cool down, depending on the temperature. When we were there, it was like 40 to 50 degrees.
Almost like today, except that it wasn't raining.
Yeah, it wasn't raining. If it had been raining, we would not have seen. The butterflies are not moving around when it's raining.
How
So.
far by horseback?
Pardon me?
How far by horseback?
We went for like
About-
45 minutes
Yeah,
or so,
about 45 minutes.
and then hiking the rest of it. But because it's such
Yeah.
high altitude, it was hard breathing.
Yeah, yeah. So we had to walk another probably half an hour or so after we got off the horses. So.
So once they get down, they just stay on it?
They just hang there. They do move around a little bit. They'll
They're
fly.
feeding at all?
Mm-mm. No.
And do they go back to the same place? Like if they
Mm.
come off that tree and they're flying around, do they go back to that tree or don't?
I think they'll just land anywhere.
Just anywhere?
And they also aren't always in exactly the same spot.
Uh-huh.
The day before, 2 days before, they were higher up than where we went.
So they all went kind of to that.
So they move around a bit. So on the way down, there was this flowering bush. And so, yes, if they find nectar, they will feed. For the most part, they don't eat it all during the wintertime. They're doing something called puddling. There's water underneath. It's very moist right there. And so they will come down to the water and drink water, because dehydration would be a problem. They need to get enough water. We were just sitting there doing this sort of quiet meditation. One of the guides was sort of talking us through, and then we opened our eyes, and there were just, I did this a little too fast, but there was just butterflies everywhere around us. When you're up high, up at the elevation where we were seeing them, there's a barrier. They don't want you right next to the butterflies. They want you to be, keep your distance, no flash photography, just talking in whispers. But as we walked down, this was in the afternoon, and so it's warmer, and the butterflies are moving around more. Like I say, they'll move around to cool down. They'll move around to heat up. There was a lot of steps. And the one where we had to walk the whole way, they told us how many steps. I don't remember what it was, but it was a lot. And then at the bottom, there were people selling butterfly paraphernalia. And then every time we did something, the guides would always have some sort of surprise. And this was on the way down, that there was just this gorgeous sunset, a little bit of alcohol and some snacks, So the bird was actually the black-headed grosbeak, and they or black-backed. Wait a minute, black-backed oriole,
The orioles, but we didn't see it.
We didn't see black-backed orioles, but there are two kinds, and that black-headed grosbeak, you saw it just had the absolute coloration of the monarchs. And the first one that we saw, I didn't actually see the bird, but the guides could tell it was there because you'd see the butterflies just kind of flying out of the way, but the bird was just grabbing, just like feasting on them. And the one that was in the tree, the picture was taken, the close-ups were taken with a cell phone through a spotting scope. And some of them, I have a big lens on my camera, but the really close-up stuff in the movies, those were cell phone through a spotting scope. But the bird was sitting in a tree, and one of the people, she spotted it with her naked eyes. I was amazed, but anyway.
And remember, I mentioned that the caterpillars and the butterflies are toxic, and apparently for this grosbeak, it's toxic if the bird eats enough of them. So it just eats and eats and then just throws up. So it's just get what they need, and then that's enough.
Let's see, there was one other thing I saw here, and then the tree that they're on is the oyamel fir tree, and it's the Abies religiosa, because you saw that he was holding the frond from it, and it looks like a cross, and that's why the scientific name. And it's just, it has the same habitat requirements that the monarchs need. It's in the cloud forest, so it's kind of moist, but it's protected. It's not snowing. It's not below freezing, and it's kind of and they're on the south-facing sides of the mountains. And I think it's your turn, Jude, right? Yeah.
Apologies for my sniffles. I do not have COVID. I had this morning. So, we all know that monarchs are in trouble, and there's many threats to monarchs, as well as threats to a lot of the pollinators that we know about. And conservation biologists have dubbed the precarious population of the monarch as the canary in the cornfield. Now, they serve as an iconic representative of all pollinators, and conserving monarchs will benefit pollinators and many other plants and animals. So there's something called the umbrella effect, which means by protecting one infected species, you invariably protect many more. So the threats to monarchs are all human-induced threats. Loss of habitat, climate change, monoculture, and pesticides. The loss of habitat actually has gotten better in Mexico. Mexico was one of the first countries to protect the monarchs, and that they developed those biospheres. And because of the partnership with the World Wildlife Fund, there's less and less logging. So actually the winter habitat is much better. than it had been. That's probably one success story in this. But there's widespread loss of habitat in Canada and the United States due to development and changing land management practices. In some areas of the United States, farming monoculture, soybeans, corn, and pesticides used to make sure that those populations survive, have eradicated the common milkweed, which is a real important plant for the caterpillars, and also other wildflowers that are rich in nectar. Roadside pesticide use, we know on the interstates, that's very common, and that, especially if it's killing the flowering plants alongside, that has a similar effect to insect populations. Climate change has really wreaked havoc. Extreme weather threatens populations during all cycles of their lives. It's made it challenging for monarchs and other insects to time appropriate nectaring sites, shelter, and host plants with their movement and cycles. Wherever there's larvae, you need to have milkweed. Adults have to find nectar from a variety of plants, but I just read just this past week about that monarchs can't survive below 55 degrees, so they have to be able to survive during their breeding cycle. And it can't get too cold for them, it can't get too hot for them. They need water.
Well, they can't fly at above 50, and they can't live below freezing.
They can find
Yeah,
shelter.
but they can't live. They can't get frozen or too wet. But they can live, but they can't fly if it's colder than 55.
So with all of these issues, scientists are studying the disconnect and the timing and location of monarchs, where they are in their life stages, and you're using the data from the work that Emily did, the community science project that I did, and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people throughout the United States that are doing these similar projects and are giving their data, and that information is being used by scientists to help maintain biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. So there's new information. Good news, you've probably heard about this, and I don't know if any of you watched Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes. It was about a month ago, did a whole program. This past year, the wintering population doubled from the previous. The year that we were there was one of the lowest years ever. So look at this, but then look. This is this year. So it doubled from last year. It means that when we were there last year, the wintering habitat took up about 2.5 acres. This past winter, it was about 4 acres. And that's how they measure. They measure, this is the line where the population is going to be sort of okay. This is the number of acres that you find them in the winter. It doesn't mean that it's great, but it means it's okay. And you can see in the past decades, there have been years where it's pretty much below that red line. So even though the population doubled, the population of overwintering monarchs doubled this past year, it's still much, much lower than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the important pieces of information that we're learning about is that this past December, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed through the Endangered Species Act that the monarch butterfly become a protected species. And they just, I think, finished the public comment period just this last week.
Yeah, the comment, well, they had extended this one. The other one just ended, the other one I'm going to talk about in a bit.
Okay.
This one, it might be still going, I'm not sure about this one.
So they're going to make a final ruling in probably about a year and a half to determine whether the monarch butterfly will be labeled as protected, as threatened. So that's one step below endangered. So the criteria is that there'll be some critical habitat designation, so there'll be certain habitats that will be an area for monarchs to be protected, but then there's certain exemptions. So anything that's private land or agricultural land is exempt from protection. It has to be either state or federal land.
Public lands.
Public land where they can be protected. Can you go to the next one?
Yep.
So because they're looking at winter habitat, the only winter habitat that the United States can protect is California. Those are the western monarchs. So the western monarchs that are west of the Rocky Mountains, migrate. They're up in the mountains and then they go over to the coast, Monterey, south of Monterey. There are several different protected areas along there. And that's what they're looking at for the protection. They can't protect the winter habitat of the eastern monarchs because that's in Mexico. It's not our jurisdiction. However, they are being protected by the Mexican government, so that's a good thing. And Canada, same thing. Canada actually labeled the monarchs as endangered several years ago. So they've been protected in Canada, they've been protected in Mexico. So the United States is the last. And you know, monarchs don't recognize borders. They are basically a North American species, and they are traveling. They're not showing their passports or their driver IDs, and so they need to be protected all along the way. They're traveling.
Okay. So the OML fir trees, they grow high at elevation, 8,000 to 11,500 feet. They're in the cloud forest, as I said before. Only about 2% of the original forest is still there. Now, some of that is because of modern logging. Part of that has to do with even natural climate change in terms of, because we're talking about 2% of the original forest from eons ago. But a lot of it has been logged. But the other aspect of it is that it needs the temperatures that it has historically had. It needs it to be cool. It needs it to be moist. And those forests are creeping upwards in the mountains. They can notice that, but that natural creep is fairly slow and could disappear. That forest could disappear by 2090, which would be the same point at which monarch butterflies would not have a habitat to go to anymore. There's some various things that people are looking into, and one of them is that this gentleman, Mr. Saint Romero, who's a scientist, is working to see if he can move the IML fir up to different elevations on other mountains. And so he worked with some of the indigenous people that are helping to protect the forest, and they grew seedlings, and then they basically replanted them at 11,800 feet, at 12,500 feet, and at 13,000 feet. And after 3 years, the 80% of those were still surviving. So that might be a way to help protect that habitat. So some ways to get involved with the protection of monarch butterflies. Some of them are to plant habitat, habitat in terms of having common milkweed, having swamp milkweed, having nectaring plants for the adults, sharing information with people, participating in community science, such as tagging butterflies or counting them, contributing to conservation. This is an organization that, there's many, but we really like Monarch Joint Ventures. They do education, they do research, conservation, and this right here shows all of the organizations that they partner with. So they are sort of really a clearinghouse for all of these different organizations. This is one last little sort of sad thing that's happened right now. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, on their webpage, it says that they work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. But there recently was you have to just click the space bar, I think. The Fish and Wildlife Service has made a proposal to take the definition of harm away from the Endangered Species Act by saying habitat is not harm. Habitat does not contribute. Harm is only if you are injuring or killing an animal as opposed to destroying its habitat. So I think the comment period from this just ended a couple of days ago. I did send in something myself on it to see what happens, but I don't know. So if they take habitat out of the equation, then I guess the slide that Judy talked about the threatens probably wouldn't make any difference, but fingers crossed. Anyway, so any questions? Yeah.
I'm having a little confusion about the acres involved.
Yeah.
The number 5 to 6 acres of total area strikes me as a really small area. How are they defining that? Is that a square foot has to be covered with 100 butterflies for those acres? Or is it more like 200 by 200 feet being the acre, has to have some locations where it's, 200 butterflies.
I don't know how,
That-
yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't know how much density. The interesting thing is that the protected area there for the butterflies goes through 2 different Mexican states. And one of them allows drones. All right, and they actually are surveying the area, and I don't know how dense they have to be. That's a wonderful question. Every time we get a question, we go, my God, let's see if we can find out about this. But using drones to be able to see how much area. The other state doesn't allow drones. And I don't remember what they were actually doing, just looking on the ground, basically. But it's all an approximation.
Yeah.
And
When they also, I mean, you could see the density of butterflies when you were looking at those slides, how many butterflies there were, in one specific area. And I think maybe the assumption is that if it's 1 acre, 2 acres, 3 acres, it's that same density. And then when they're surveying with the drones and they expand to like 7 or 8 acres and there's nothing there or very light density, I think that's how they make that determination.
but it's a good.
Hopefully we'll be getting more precise data.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because they were talking about how, the drone technology was a very helpful one because they really could go over a large area, whereas, you cross the state line and the rules were different,
Grind up a few of them in the process.
so, but,
But I know when they do like a plant sample or a plant survey, they make some kind of a square and then they count the number of plants.
Or if
in
you're
there.
cruising timber in the woods,
Yeah,
to
right.
figure out how many thousand board feet there
Yeah.
are in an acre.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
the data doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah, they're just trying to figure out basically, what area is covered by a significant amount of butterflies, and how they do that is going to vary a lot.
And,
But
and when we're talking about significant numbers, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of butterflies.
I mean, that was the incredible thing. That was the lowest year, and for us, it was like, and when a butterfly landed on one of those clusters, the tree shook, and it was, The other thing was, when you saw the ones that were sort of white, that was the underside of the butterfly wings. They were up like this. So there were some people that were there, and one of the people with us was explaining to them, no, those aren't dead butterflies. Those are live butterflies with their wings up. So, any other questions? Yeah.
How many species of butterflies are there?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
Thousands.
But in terms of monarchs, there are monarchs in other parts of the world too. But I don't.
But I
Yeah,
don't
I
think
don't
they
know.
migrate.
Not the same kind of distances,
Yeah.
but I don't know the answer to that.
Along those lines, my wife had the question, are there any other species of butterfly that have anything like this multiple 3 or 4 cycle and then the long distance return?
I know I was just hearing something about there are butterflies that migrate, but not to this kind of distance. I know I read one, I think, that goes from Europe maybe down to Africa or something, but they don't have the same kind of thing, and there's something that goes down to the Cape, but it's, it's nothing.
Meaning Massachusetts?
No, being Massachusetts Cape, yeah, I think, but, but nothing that has the same incredible distance and number of, the incredible thing is all these different, generations, and then they all end up back here,
Yeah.
so,
I mean, there are a lot of birds that do that.
Yeah,
They're
but-
hard to turn.
but
Ten
butterflies, no,
thousand
yeah,
But they don't have this
They don't have that.
competitive
No, they don't.
reproduction cycle
Yeah.
on the upswing.
They do.
right, yeah. Yeah.
Do they have the innateness that, so the ones that left my yard in August, will their offsprings come back to my yard?
Well, it's gonna be like 4 generations.
Yeah,
later.
But, yeah.
They're,
We don't know
they
that.
have that like Sam, like
Well, they
Sam
don't,
and
as
always
Emily,
go back.
Emily said that, they only tag the ones that are migrating
Back,
south.
yeah.
they aren't tagging the ones that are, and
And-
they would have to tag each generation, and that would be really.
Well, and they wouldn't know. I mean, I think that's the thing. It'd be hard to track. Are you this butterfly's great grandson? Yeah. But I think that
I mean,
they're.
they could probably do some
Oh,
kind of DNA.
yeah. I guess they probably.
Like with Sam
Yeah.
and the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think part of it is also sort of opportunistic, because when they're flying up, they need to, when they're laying, they need to have nectar to keep moving north, and then they can't stop if there's not milkweed, So, and every year, like this year, when's the milkweed actually going to grow, and so the timing varies, and probably where they go varies.
And the wind.
Yeah.
I mean, there are years where There have been a couple of years where I didn't have any butterflies in my yard, but then my neighbor down the hill had butterflies. And I think it just had to do with the winds at that point.
Yeah.
How does the tagging procedure work?
It's a little tiny sticker. You get a sticker, it's stuck to a backing or whatever, and there, as you saw, it was really tiny. And there's a particular spot in between the sort of veins of the wing where the sticker goes, and it's so light that it doesn't impede the butterfly at all. And you can get them, Monarch joint ventures may have them, or you can see them, and they send them to you with information about how to do it and what to write down and everything, but for the last generation. Like I had asked, can I hold on to these stickers for next year? And the answer is no, those stickers are, because they want to make sure that you don't put them on until it's the last generation.
Now, is there a special tool to put these?
Finger, with your finger.
Push your finger?
Yeah. I watched it. I didn't ever I took some stickers home and then I never saw another monarch butterfly the rest of it. But I don't see a ton by my house. But you just peel it and you can hold, there are ways you can, I've caught butterflies and you can hold them so that they're safe, and they do have a protocol for that to, protect them. You don't want to have any bug spray on your hands or, even probably perfume, any kind of, you don't want to have any, you just want to have clean hands, and not handle them very much because you don't want to touch their wings a lot. But you just kind of peel it off and just stick it on there.
You didn't show any data from that project. And
I'm
curious, one part of the data which would kind of encourage people to participate
Monarch joint venture.
would be to know how many of your stickers that you did 300 of in your backyard
Yeah.
actually got found somewhere.
I think Monarch joint venture collects this information.
Yeah.
They have the data.
It'd be nice to throw that in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point. It's an incredibly low, I might have even written it down, low percentage of them that get found. I don't know if I did or not, write down the numbers, but, oh yeah, yeah, it's a crazy low numbers that get found. But anyway,
Is there a number on it, or is it?
yeah,
calculated, or-
it's got a number on it. And so when you tag it, you write down the number of the tag and then where you were and the date. And there may be other information about the weather and stuff like that. I can't remember, but yeah, there's a number so that when it gets found, you send that information in to the clearinghouse. It collects all that data, and then they, so that if it gets found, they go, oh, this one left Hillsborough, New Hampshire. This one left Guilford.
But I
So
recommend that
does
you.
New Hampshire have a different color code than Vermont?
Oh,
I don't think so.
no.
Yeah, I think they just,
Could be millions.
well, there are millions of numbers.
Yeah.
But there's only one.
Fit a million.
Oh, right. Well,
Tiny tag.
so that's an interesting question because I don't know. It might be that they just use the same numbers again, although the fact that they don't want you to reuse the numbers, that's a good question. Every time we walk
See
away,
the number?
you can see it with your eyes.
Why don't they use QR codes, which have a much larger density
You're
of
right.
information?
That's a good
I-
idea.
And then if
Good
they
idea.
duplicate the QR code on your piece of paper, then
Yeah.
you're sending them the
That's a
stuff.
good idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
But, I do recommend, all of these questions are, a lot of them we can't answer, but if you do go to Monarch Joint Venture, they're the experts who are there, and you could just ask them a question and they'd be happy to answer that for you. There's also, they've partnered with Journey North, which is tracking the butterflies that are returning, that are coming north, and there's actually a living map that will show you where they are at this particular moment in time. But I do recommend going to the website. They have free webinars, so you could, if you want to learn more about something, you can do that. If you want to take classes, I think there's a minimal fee to take online classes. It's a really great nonprofit organization.
And classes on planting pollinator gardens and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Where do you get the swamp milkweed?
So I got it
We
at,
have it on regular milkweed.
Yeah.
so go to if you have a local garden center, ask them
Yeah.
if they have some. Swamp milkweed, and they also call it,
Butterfly weed.
butterfly weed, but it's swamp milkweed is the more common name. And
Does
if,
it need wet?
no, it does not need wet. You can plant it anywhere in your garden. It
We have
will,
wet, so I could
it
put
will spread a little bit, but not like crazy. And I have, at this point, I have probably 5 or 6 plants that are growing to be about their 7th year, and they're coming up again, and I got a couple of new plants this year as well.
Judy gave me a couple, and I thought they died. I'm bad with plants. I thought I'd killed them off. And then all of a sudden, a couple years ago, I go out there, and there's like, 3 or 4 little stalks, and on them I had 5 caterpillars. And I didn't get to see the chrysalises because I'm in the woods, and they went who knows where. But
I mean, the trick is the only way that they will propagate is by seed, and most of mine don't make it to seed because the caterpillars have already eaten the flowers. But there were, I think last year, because there were very few caterpillars last year, very few, they did go to seed and they did propagate. So I have a couple more plants than I had this year.
So, yeah.
So if they all pretty much go the same place south, but then when they're going north, they just end up
They
all
spread
different
out,
places?
yeah.
They don't stay together?
And they also sort of, they don't, like when they leave here, when I was in college, I remember seeing butterflies flying over my dorm, like a big flock of butterflies and stuff. They leave and they're more dispersed and are moving with the food, and butterflies like, oh, here, this looks good, I'll go here, so but yeah, they spread out and go over the whole. And the Midwest is a dangerous spot for them because there's a lot of pesticide use, a lot of monoculture, not necessarily, but a lot of the planting of wildflowers and stuff along highways. You'll sometimes read these things and say, wow, it's killing the butterflies that get hit by cars, but at least there's food for the ones that don't.
And we all remember what it was like when we were kids, all of the insects that would be smashed against the front windshield of the car. You don't see that anymore. And
So anyway, well, thanks so much for coming, and
great questions.
yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you on this stormy night.
Yeah, every time when people come, they ask us more things that we go, oh, we need to
But
find
that's